I hope everything sounds okay. I hope that you guys are relaxed, and I hope you had a good day and are having a good night. I'm currently recording this at 2 in the morning. Um, I'm probably gonna do this as a consistent thing, maybe once a week or more, depending on if you guys like it or not. I watch a lot of ASMR. It really helps me sleep or, relax if I'm stressed out or something. I really like talking, listening to people talk, and like mouth noises and things like that. Nothing too extreme or weird, but like I said earlier, I hope everything sounds okay. And so yeah, since I like ASMR where there's just constant talking, I figured I'd do a thing where I read you guys some of my favorite stories. As you can see by the smile on my face, I'm actually quite excited for it. The book I'm going to start off with is actually my favorite book ever out of everything I've read in my 22 years of life. It's called The Beginning After the End. It's so good. It's so good. I started off by reading the webcomic, and I fell in love with the webcomic, but at the time when I caught up to it, there was only about 80 to 90 chapters, so as one gets when they finally catch up with a good story, I was kind of disappointed. And normally I don't do this, but I decided to go ahead and read the light novel where the comic left off. And I'm so glad I did. It's so good. It's so good. I can hardly contain my excitement for this book, I'm telling you. So I decided to share it with the world in, a medium where people might actually, sit down and listen to it, which is ASMR. I'm currently using a Blue Yeti mic. It's not like the big versions that I usually see ASMR artists use. This one's like a mini version because it was cheaper, but it works really well. Like, I tested my audio before I started recording, and it sounded pretty good so far. Yeah, and I also use it for, my main channel and where I do gaming stuff and whatnot, and, for Twitch streams, and it sounds really nice. So, I hope, I know I said this already, but I hope you guys, like the way it sounds what she looked like, I'd have to admit that she's a beauty, but that might have been caused by my half-blurry eyes. Rather than a glamorous beauty, I would better describe her as lovely in a very kind and gentle sense, with distinct auburn hair and brown eyes. I couldn't help but notice her long eyelashes and perky nose that made me want to just cling to her. She just permeated this motherly feel. Is this why babies were attracted to their mothers? I peeled my face away and turned right to barely make out the person who I assumed was my father by the idiotic grin and teary eyes he gazed at me with. Immediately he said, "Hi, little Art. I'm your daddy. Can you say Dada?" I glanced around to see both my mother and the house doctor, for all the certification he seemed to have, roll their eyes as my mother managed to scoff. "Honey, he was just born." I took a closer look at my father, and I can see why my lovely mother was attracted to him. Besides the few loose screws he seemed to have by expecting a newborn to articulate a two-syllable word. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and think he said that out of the joy of becoming a father. He was a very charismatic-looking man, with a cleanly shaven square jawline that complemented his features. His hair, a very ashy brown color, seemed to be kept trim, while his eyebrows were strong and fierce, extending in a sword-like fashion, meeting to a V shape. Yes, his eyes held a gentle quality, whether it was from the way his eyes drooped a bit at the end, or from the deep blue, almost sapphire hue that radiated from his irises. "He isn't crying, doctor. I thought newborns were supposed to cry when they were born," I heard my mother say. By the time I finished checking it, observing my parents, the wannabe doctor simply excused himself, saying, "There are cases where the infant does not cry. Please continue resting for a couple of days, Mrs. Lewin, and let me know if anything happens to Arthur, Mr. Lewin." The following couple of weeks after my journey out of the tunnel was a new kind of torture for me. I had little to no motor control over my limbs, except being able to wave them around. And even that got tiring quickly. I realized all too grudgingly that babies don't really get to control their fingers all that much. I don't know how to break it to you guys, but when you place your finger on a baby's palm, they don't grab it because they like you. They grab it because it's like getting hit in the funny bone. It's a reflex. Forget motor control. I can't even excrete my waste at my discretion. I was not yet the master of my own bladder. It just came out. On the bright side, one of the few perks that I became happily accustomed to was being breastfed by my mother. Don't get me wrong, I had no ulterior motives whatsoever. It's just that breast milk tasted a lot better than baby formula and has better nutritional value, okay? Please believe me. Okay, pause real quick. So, remember how I said I continued from where the webcomic stopped, and then I picked up from the light novel. So, I hadn't read this part in the light novel before. I was like way further ahead than this part, so some of this stuff, like some of the jokes, are really new to me. And as you can see by my reactions, it's kind of throwing me off a bit. Anyway, the satanic demon summoning place seemed to be my parents' room, and from what I figured, the place that I was currently stuck in was, hopefully, a place in my world from the past when electricity hadn't yet been invented. My mother quickly Excuse me. 3 adult human-sized boulders emerged from the ground and slammed against a nearby tree. What in the name of... That was it. I flailed my arms in anger, but my idiot father interpreted that as a wow and had a big grin on his face saying, "Your daddy is awesome, huh?" No, my father was a much better fighter. When he put on his 2 iron watch out, future ladies. Prepare to be heartbroken. Boy, he really jinxed himself. After weeks of attempting to crawl, yet only achieving an uncoordinated scuffle in place, I had finally succeeded, even managing to sneak into the family's library/study room while my mother was hanging the laundry out to dry. My mother rued the day I started to become proficiency in relocating their mana from their mana core into various parts of their bodies. A conjurer's power and talent comparatively is measured by the power of their mana veins, which indicates the speed and effectiveness of absorbing mana from the outside world to cast a spell. Mages, or mana manipulators, are typically categorized into one of these two divisions, since attempting to become proficient in both from an early stage is incredibly time-consuming and inefficient. Most are born with a skewed difference in their mana channels and mana veins. Augmenters do not need very strong mana veins because they mostly utilize the mana from their cores, while conjurers do not need very powerful mana channels because they do not release their mana into their own bodies. As proficiency level rises, the distinction between augmenters and conjurers lessens naturally, but that is only so at an advanced level. So, sorry about that, my family's walking around. My idiot father seems to be a decently competent augmenter and a less than average conjurer. That healing light, though, what was my mother? Ah, there are a few rare deviants. The two most well-known types of deviants are elemental deviants and emitters, while some still remain undiscovered. Ones that are highly sought after are the emitters, more commonly known as healers. Healers possess the rare ability to cast their unique restorative mana onto others directly, recovering injuries and impairments. Wow, my mom is the best. Fundamentals of conjuring. The proper steps of utilizing mana for conjurers is to gather the surrounding mana in the area, drawing it into your body, then, after circulating it into your mana core to stabilize and purify the atmosphere's diluted mana, you channel it into an appropriate conductor, being a staff, a wand, a ring, or something else, just to give a few examples. With the incantations as a mental controller for your will into shaping the mana into whatever spell you want. The more powerful the spell, the longer it will take to draw in surrounding mana, store it in your mana core, where it is condensed and purified, and finally channel and release. Because conjuring involves exerting focused mana into a particular spell, conjurers will notice that they have a special aptitude of certain elements, either being air, water, fire, or earth, but with proper training can become adequate in the basics of all elements. Fundamentals of augmenting. Unlike conjuring, much less time can be spent gathering the surrounding mana. Efficient use of augmenting requires speed and precision, and the use of the mana from your core, and less from the mana in the atmosphere. This was where it clicked. Augmenting was very close to using ki, except you could also draw mana in from your surroundings. The reason why there weren't any kinds of conjurers in my old world was because there was no mana in the atmosphere to draw from and create a phenomenon. My gaze tensed as I read on. Augmenting requires proper distribution of mana into different parts of the body, depending on how the user sees fit. While it seems simple at a glance, augmenting requires much insight into the individual's own body. Being able to utilize the mana channels efficiently requires years of both mental and physical practice. Because augmenting involves extracting mana in its purest form from the user's mana core, there are no highly notable distinctions in an elemental sense at an early stage. face was directly opposite of his father, seeing how Reynolds almost gravitates away from text as longer than the weekly newspaper. Looking at how excited he got when we went out to town, I decided to go shopping for food once every other day instead of twice a week. No, I told you, I'm not a doting mother. This is for his education of the outside world and for fresh food in the house. Yeah, that's it. My son seemed to be interested in a lot of things. I can't get enough of seeing his head that seemed so disproportional to his little body, turning left and right while trying to take in everything around him. He seemed particularly intrigued by his father's practices. Reynolds was a pretty competent adventurer back in the day. Being a B-class adventurer by the age of 28 was actually a pretty fast climb. Acquiring an E-class rank, the lowest rank, required taking a test to prevent us from sending eager but ignorant adolescents to their deaths. As for the higher ranks, I've only seen a couple of A-class adventurers in my years of working at the guild, but I've yet to see an S-class adventurer, assuming they actually exist. At the Adventurer Guild, or what we just called the Guild Hall back then in Valden, I got to see too many eager young teens. I swear, I was surprised they didn't float away from having their overly inflated egos get to their heads. At least they were ambitious. One time, I was assigned to proctor a basic practical exam, where the examinee had to simply demonstrate fundamental competency in their manipulation. But before the test had even begun, the kid fell straight onto his back because the sword he was carrying had been too heavy for him. Speaking of airheads, Reynolds' shirt came off his one back then. The moment he saw me in the guild hall, his jaw literally dropped, and he just stood there until the guy in line behind him elbowed him to hurry out. He hurriedly wiped away his drool and managed to mumble "Hi, can I trade in the stuff for the mission?" I just giggled as he turned to beet red from embarrassment. He managed to gather up the courage to ask me out for dinner, and we just hit it off from there. Even now, I can't help but smile when I see his droopy blue puppy eyes looking at me. Art somehow wound up with both of our redeeming traits, making him that much more adorable. You should see him when I have to change his diapers. I don't know why, but he always turns red in his cheeks and covers his face with his tiny little fingers. Could babies his age even get embarrassed? The next landmark that made it to my baby journal, which is purely for educational purposes, by the way, and not because I am a doting mother, was when he first said "mama." He said "mama." I told him to say "mama" again and again just to make sure I didn't hear it wrong. Reynolds sulked for the entire day because Art said "mama" before "dada." Ha! I won. The rest of the year went by pleasantly with my son sticking by me wherever I went, and frequently looking out the window to see his father practice after dinner. I'm glad Reynolds gave up being an adventurer and instead took up a post as a guard nearby for our town. Being an adventurer may have brought in more money, but not knowing when or if my husband would come home was not worth any amount of extra money, more so after that incident. To our relief, little Art never got sick, but oftentimes I would find him sitting still on his butt while closing his eyes. At first, I thought he was having trouble relieving himself, but after checking the first couple of times, that didn't seem to be the case. How strange. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought babies his age were supposed to be energetic and flightly, but after his episodes of escaping to the study room, he seemed to spend a lot of time sitting still, almost meditating. I was worried at first, but although it would happen a couple times a day, it only lasts for a couple of minutes, and Art would seem strangely happy afterwards. The way he holds his arms up and looks at me makes me just want to gobble him up. Not a doting mother. wasn't slow, but I was getting a pretty big head start compared to everybody else, so I wasn't complaining. These past 2 years have not gone to waste, for I finally gathered all of my mana into my solar plexus, and was in the midst of condensing a mana core when, boom. Okay, so remember when I said we were getting into the meat and potatoes before? Now we're really getting into the meat and potatoes. This is where it starts to really pick up. So now we're on to chapter 7, or My Life Now, part 1. Reynolds Lewin's point of view. Okay, this should be interesting. My baby boy. I'm so happy we had a son. I wonder, when can baby start training? When did I start training again? Man, I can't wait to teach my baby boy all about magic. I hope he turns out to be an augmenter like his old pops. I may know the basics of conjuring, but I can't do anything practical with it except use it as a form of mental exercise. Alice, on the other hand, is one of the most talented people I've ever seen. Even as an emitter, she's exceptional. Back then, after she agreed to date me, she joined my party and we went on missions together. Her restorative powers were amazing in and of itself, but what shocked me the most was when she used an area of effect spell, which healed all allies inside. Talk about a one of a kind. And I'm her husband. I still don't get tired of saying that. Back in the good old days before we had to settle down, we would go into the beast glades and hunt for mana beasts. Mana beasts were various unique animals and creatures that were born with the ability to absorb mana into their bodies and create their own mana core, which we call beast cores. Beast cores had an unlimited amount of uses, making them very valuable and highly sought after. Of course, the higher the classes the beast cores were, the more valuable they were. Mana beasts were classified anywhere from E-class, the domesticated fanged bull used for meat and leather, to your double S-class monster. I can't tell you much about those, simply because I've never seen or heard of one, but supposedly they do exist. Rule of thumb, you should assume that the mana beasts are stronger than humans of the same class. This was simply because even if we take mana out of the picture, a beast's physical body was much stronger than the average humans. While the beast glades were dangerous, as long as you were cautious and didn't get lost, it was pretty easy to keep yourself out of trouble. The stronger beasts tended to be further down in dungeon-like caves, underground, or farther away. The first few tens of kilometers of the beast glades are pretty well mapped, and as long as you were at least a C-class adventurer, you'd be fine. Once in a while, there were missions posted up that required a couple parties of adventurers. Those were usually for trying to clear and map the harder dungeons that weren't fully explored. If a mana beast had the power to create its own lair, and have other mana beasts serve him, then you could bet there were treasures to be gained. I tell my son Art all about this life, telling him this and much more so I can eyes wide in disbelief and worry. I nudged my wife down while covering her with a temporary shield that would last for a few minutes. I rushed toward the direction of the explosion, shielding my body with a layer of mana over my skin. The debris from what was left on my house was constantly thrown towards me as I reached deeper into the source of the explosion. After fighting my way through the scraps of what was left of my house and several pieces of rocks, I saw it. My son had the all but noticeable translucent barrier flickering around him. Better yet, the pushing force of his awakened powers was what caused this explosion. He was floating in the center of a crater that cleared 3/4 of our house, as well as our entire backyard. My legs gave out, and I just landed on my knees while I continued to gape at this sight. My son was almost 3 years old when he awakened. Only 3. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Reynolds, honey, I glanced back at my wife with my mouth still hanging from shock. She managed to slowly make her way towards me after there was no more debris being thrown about. She was making half steps towards me, covering her face with her arms to shield what she could from the strong pushing force still emanating from Arthur. Reynolds, what happened? What's going on? Where's Art? Still unable to find the strength to speak, I simply pointed my finger towards the direction of our son. While confused, she looked in the direction I was pointing, and all she could manage to whisper was, "Oh my." I swear, no matter how many times I've reread the comic, and just now reading this part of the novel, Reynolds and Alice's reaction to Arthur awakening at the age of 3 is always hilarious to me. Like, I'm not gonna lie, whenever I first read the comic and I saw the house explode, I actually got kind of scared too, because I was like, damn, this dude just got born like 3 years ago, and he's already gonna like die or something. But no, it was just him, awakening his mana core. One thing I do like about this is I didn't know that the reaction for awakening your core changed depending on what type of mage you were gonna be. So that's interesting to know. It's a good thing he wasn't a conjurer, because like the outward force exploded the house outward. But if he was a conjurer, and with how strong the force would have been, the house would have like crushed him with him inside. So that would have been bad. But at least nobody was like seriously hurt or anything. So okay, on to chapter 8, or My Life Now, part 2. Arthur Lewin's POV. Wow, I feel great. Feeling refreshed at my breakthrough, I closed my eyes to sense my newly formed mana core. My sweet little first raising the ground for the foundation of the house, and augmenters doing the grunt work. The house didn't take too long to finish. The beauty of magic. Surprisingly, though, none of my father's ex-party members seemed to question why our house blew up. That seemed to say a lot about my idiot father. During the middle of reconstructing our house, my birthday came around, May 29th. My parents woke me up that morning with a present and what seemed to be a loaf of bread in their hands. Ah, it was a cake. Would have been easier to tell if it wasn't black. Opening the present box to find a carefully carved wooden sword, I hugged both my parents, thanking them for the present and the cake. This surprised me because my parents didn't bother to celebrate my past 2 birthdays, so I assumed this world didn't really celebrate it. I later found out that birthdays are celebrated starting at the age of 3 because of a tradition from a long time ago when babies were more susceptible to death before the age of 3. That makes sense. How medieval. Another thing I took an interest in noticing. Seeing children, as well as teens, working on farms with their family and forges as apprentice blacksmiths made me realize there was no mandatory form of a structured education system. Any sort of rudimentary education was provided by their families, just basics like reading and writing. As soon as I turned 3, my mother began giving me lessons for a set time, teaching me how to read and write. Playing the role of a genius son, I pretended to learn quickly, to her delight, so I could read harder books in the library without drawing suspicion. These last couple of weeks passed by in a blast. After awakening, my father taught me the basics of mana and how to start training in it as best as he could. He tried to simplify as much as possible so that a toddler could understand it, I guess, but if it weren't for my adult comprehensive abilities, I don't think I would have retained as much. The basics are as follows. An easy way to know where you stand in strength lies in the color of your mana core. When you start off, the mana core is black, due to the body's blood and other impurities mixed with the mana particles, as they form together to become a mana core. As the mana inside the person's body becomes purer, and the impurities are filtered out, it'll change into a dark red color. From there, the lighter the mana core's color became, from dark red, then to a lighter red. The order goes as follows: black, red, orange, yellow, silver, and then white. From the red mana core until the yellow mana core, the colors split into 3 shades of that said color: dark, solid, and light. Rule of thumb: the lighter the mana core's color was, the purer one's mana core was, and the more power they would have access to. While the lessons with my father proved useful, I was getting impatient at the pace we were moving at. I asked Mother a couple of days later, "Mom, can I get books on magic?" Since my mother still had some connections in the guild hall, or the Adventurers Guild, she managed to acquire a pretty wide collection of books on basic mana manipulation, as well as fighting with different weapons. Some of them were just picture books with only simple words, and mostly pictures of basics on how mana was condensed, but I ignored those. My mother gave me a strange look because the books that I had been looking at were on a higher level. She assumed I wouldn't even be able to understand most of the words in there, and tried to cajole me into some of the simpler books, saying that it would be easier to understand. But eventually, she relented. A typical day would involve taking reading and writing lessons from Mother, and augmenting training with my father. After he covered the basic theory and stop in the middle of a set of chapters because that would be kind of odd. And like it would kind of break the story up in a weird way. So, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the story so far. I know it's a lot of exposition and world building, and you know, not much has happened yet. But don't worry. Well, I know I said this already, but it's really gonna pick up like from now on. So, let me know what you guys think. I'll probably upload, like I said, when I start the video, probably once a week to start off. But, you know, if more people watch or like the video, or, you know, just let me know in the comments. I might upload twice a week. I don't want to upload too much because I don't want to catch up to the light novel because it's still updating, but the book is pretty long. It's like 900 something chapters, so I don't think I have to worry about catching up anytime soon. But yeah, like I said, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's anything I can do better on the ASMR side of things. Let me know if there's different kinds of ASMR you want to see me try, or you know, if there are